Hey everyone, welcome back to the FBC Extra Podcast. This is Owen Fay, your Deacon of Music and AV, and today Matt is speaking with Pastor Tyler Scarlett, the teaching pastor here at Forest Baptist Church. We had so many great sermon series he provided last year from 1 Peter, Daniel, and his On Marriage series. We want to know more about Pastor Tyler's thoughts from last year and as well as what's going on for this year. Take it away, Matt.
So, Pastor Tyler, thank you so much for being with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Matt. It's an honor to be here. I'm humbled. I think you said this might be the first episode or one of the firsts.
Yeah.
Leading off the batting lineup is always a tricky thing.
Yeah.
It's a nerve-wracking thing, but I'm honored to do what I can.
Well, speaking of leading off, you have a son who's about to start driving on his own.
That's right.
The first one out of the lineup. How does that feel?
Terrifying. Yeah, absolutely terrifying, dreadful. It's like all the things I wished I had taught him, I go back and question myself. But no, he has really matured and grown. He's probably a safer, more cautious driver than I was at 16.
Oh, wow.
I mean, seriously, he's very careful. So, no, I'm looking forward to I'm tired of being a taxi service.
Yeah.
With 6 kids, man.
Yeah.
That's all I do is drive, this kid to there. So to have a kid that I can give him $5 for gas, hey, take your siblings. I'm looking forward to that.
Enjoy it when you can. The novelty of driving your siblings around will be cool for a while, so take advantage of it.
And then it'll wear off real fast.
Yeah. So I know that you guys have gone through the Marvel movies this year, and I'm getting the sense that if it was up to you, that wouldn't be the genre you would have picked to watch. Am I correct on that?
Well, it's not my thing, but, I'm a good dad, so my boys were really into it, so I decided to jump in.
And so you got through all of them.
I did.
That's impressive, first of all, because that's like 20 movies. That's like 21, 22 movies.
Yes. No, we did. We made I'm not a quitter. If I'm going to do anything, I'm going to finish it out. So, yeah, we finished them all the summer.
Did any stand out? Any favorites there?
Yeah. So, obviously the challenge was I watched them all at a really compressed time. Because it was like 3 or 4 a week. So if you told me to describe, Infinity War Endgame, it blurs in my mind. It was a bunch of heroes fighting is really what I remember. But the one movie that did stand out to me that I really liked from an artistic standpoint, Ragnarok.
Okay.
It was so good. Mm-hmm. It felt like an MCU movie, but it had humor in it. It had these sweeping, cinematic. Mm-hmm. I know it's all cinematic, but these great, almost like picturesque moments. So my boy said the director for that one was somebody different.
Yeah.
And it stands out that way to me. So that one stands out to me as one I really enjoyed.
That one looked far more like a comic book.
That's it.
Very much like 100%. A comic book.
And that's why I think I liked it.
And
so
the guy
much.
who directed it didn't really know what he was doing. So he just said, well, let's just take the comics and create a movie.
And in all seriousness, as a preacher, I like that because I think there's an old phrase that the medium is the message. Mm-hmm. So if it's poetry, it should seem like poetry, right? Yeah. And in preaching, if it's a story, it sounds like a story. So if it's a comic book, to me, it should look like a comic book. It should have those sort of hyperbolic elements to it. So anyhow, I enjoyed Ragnarok.
So were there any you just couldn't stand?
Oh, yeah. Can you guess which one I hated?
So a lot of people like Ragnarok, so you're in the majority on that one. So I'm going to guess either Captain Marvel or Thor the Dark World.
I didn't mind either one. I hated Ant-Man.
Okay. The first one?
Couldn't stand both of them.
Okay, yeah.
I couldn't get into it. It was so
They were irrelevant.
Tropey.
Yeah.
It was so ridiculous. And so I could not get on board with that. I didn't like it. So, yeah.
No, you're not alone. I think you could have done without him too.
Is the actor Paul Rudd, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
I like him as an actor.
Yes.
So I didn't mind him.
He kind of saved it, honestly.
As
He's
much
about
as
the
possible.
Only,
Right. I'm right there with you.
Okay, so now that we're past that, what are the Scarletts watching now?
We're not watching anything right now as far as new movies, although my boys are making me stay up now with the Marvel movies. So we've seen the Eternals.
Okay.
And then I guess there's a Hawkeye, so we'll be keeping up with it. So.
Okay, because they're coming out with new stuff every 25 minutes.
I'm locked in for the next 20 years.
Sam is also trying to get me to watch Lost, which apparently is a family favorite. I've never seen it. So
Lost is hands down my favorite sort of TV show of all time.
Okay.
Hands down.
Wow.
Hands
High
down.
praise. All right, I'm excited for this.
Right.
Okay, so moving to books.
Yeah.
Pastor's picks.
Yeah.
What have we picked up? What are we going to pick up this year? I need a book recommendation. So
yeah, this summer I read a great book. Now this is not one the average person would pick up, but the title of the book is "Your Old Testament Sermons Need to Get Saved." And it's a book for preachers about how to connect the Old Testament to the person and work of Jesus and why that's important.
Okay.
And just even from some of the difficult places like, the Proverbs and Esther and some of those places where you don't think it has nothing to do with Jesus. Actually, the whole Bible has to do with Jesus. In fact, he said, these things testify about me. And so that was a great read for me and what I do week in, week out. I've got a stack of books. I probably have 200 books to be read. That's the problem with being a pastor and a book lover.
Yeah.
Is that I just keep buying them going, oh, I'll get to that. Oh, I'll get to that. Oh, I'll get to that. And I don't ever. So.
Do you have any fiction?
So Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Okay.
I've read that every year for as long as I can remember, and it is hands down my favorite fiction work of all time. Every year I say I'll read it between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I usually finish by December 1st. I read it so fast.
Wow.
I love it. I love everything about it. The opening chapter of Dickens' A Christmas Carol might be the perfect chapter in the English language.
Wow.
I'm convinced of it. The literature.
Now that's a book recommendation there.
It's beautiful. And it's actually steeped in biblical language and metaphors and references that a lot of people don't catch. So maybe that's why. But of course, I love the seasonal element, and it's just a fun story. So, it's an old one, but if you haven't read it or it's been a long time for people, I love Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Any time of year, too. It doesn't matter when it is.
So you mentioned Daniel. We got through Daniel. I've heard from the staff, because I talk to people I've heard, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong here.
Okay.
But I've heard that for you, the two hardest books to preach on were Genesis and Daniel. Is that correct or is that not correct?
Well, I've never preached Genesis yet.
Okay.
Though I do think it will be a challenge because it's a big, dense book covering a lot of time. There's just a lot of challenges to it. But yes, Daniel requires every exegetical tool in my box to make sense of it, because you've got poetry, you've got narrative, you've got apocalyptic, you just got so many things happening. And then my goal, of course, in preaching is not just to download information. Preaching is designed to edify people, to build them up, to, all Scripture is profitable. So I need to show people what is the benefit to you today, Monday to Friday, as a soccer mom, as a lawyer, as a student. And just to give them a chart, while that informs them, I want them transformed. And so to pull some of those themes out to see what's there, it's hard because it's always tempting just to go, here's the chart, everybody, And I think that there's value in that, but I don't know that that's the goal of preaching a book like Daniel. So it's a very difficult book.
I like what you said when you were in Daniel 6 about the only thing harder than preaching something nobody knows is preaching something everybody knows. And I feel Daniel is literally just both of those things.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Those first 6 chapters are so well known. And so you're fighting against familiarity. The second half of the book is so unknown, or I would say people think they know it because they know certain details,
right?
But they don't step back and look at, kind of the larger message in it, which is what my concern is. So I like the weeds. I don't dislike the weeds, but I try to stay out of the weeds because, again, my goal is not to just download a system. It's to really edify people in the message. So.
And I'll tell you, I have to thank you for your dedication to the Word, especially on this. I mean, I've been at Forest since 2008, so this Daniel series is probably in my sermon power rankings, top 3, inching its way towards 1. It's been great. My small group has said the same thing. A lot of people have said that.
I had somebody say to me, they said, wow, they said something like, this is the first time I've ever heard Daniel preached and the focus is God. That is not Daniel.
Yeah.
Or again, a chart. Like they actually feel like I'm getting to know God better, and that was the best compliment. I mean, I was so thrilled because that's my goal.
Oh, I can attest to that as well. So we're hearing Daniel every week. We're gleaning from it every Sunday. For you going through it countless hours, what has Daniel taught you?
Yeah. So I mean, Daniel has taught me about the sovereignty of God, but not just in big, broad, sweeping historic terms. I mean, here Daniel is all by himself, essentially, especially towards the end, and God cares about him where he's at, and working a tough job among, pagan people. And God says, hey, I got a plan. It's okay. You just keep doing your job. I love at the end of Daniel chapter 8, he sees the vision of the ram and the goats, and it says he was exhausted and sick. And then it says, and I got up and went and did the king's business. He just goes back to work, So there's this sense of which the vision made him sick, but then he's like, I got work to do. And I think Daniel really has taught me, like, all right, there's more work to do, for all of us. We've got the king's business to go do and to share about who this God is.
So 2 burning questions that are a little less serious. Do you think that Nebuchadnezzar will be in heaven? I know that you slightly talked about the resume, but do you think he's up there?
Yeah, I said if he came to church with that, I would baptize him. I think I said that in my sermon. So, if you put a gun to my head and made me answer the question, I tend to think yes. I tend to think that this is – because the other thing is Daniel 4, that chapter – that's not Daniel writing about Nebuchadnezzar.
That's Nebuchadnezzar writing it, correct?
That's exactly it. He wrote that section of Scripture. And where else do we have an unbeliever writing a whole section, and it has a psalm in it, right? Yeah. I think that makes it really unique and maybe is a hint towards that. So I like the thought of Nebuchadnezzar. To me, he's like the thief on the cross. His whole family probably assumed he went to hell, the thief on the cross. Right? And yet at the last second, God, Christ says, you'll be with me. And so I think Nebuchadnezzar is a reminder the gospel is for scoundrels.
Yeah.
I mean, God came for the broken, the needy, the weary. And I think Nebuchadnezzar is just the kind of person that would turn this upside down for our expectations.
And last but not least, do you think it was a giant hand or a normal-sized hand writing on the wall? There was a little bit of a small group debate on this one, so I'm curious.
I think, in all truthfulness, I don't have my Bible in front of me, but if you look at the language there, it actually implies that the hand was illuminated by the lamp. So I think it was like a shadow puppet.
So it wasn't actually the hand, it's the shadow of the hand.
Well, yeah, I think the hand appears, but the way the Hebrew reads, it's behind the lamp, and I think it probably projected a large, foreboding-looking hand on the wall. So I think it's actually kind of both, maybe, in that sense.
And so Daniel's already seen some of these visions, so for him it's no big deal.
Yeah, for him
I've seen this before.
That's right.
We didn't just go through Daniel, though. We also went through marriage in 1 Peter. So the same question applies to those, because I thought 1 Peter was really good as well. Yeah. What did 1 Peter teach you? Yeah,
1 Peter was such a great reminder to me about the church's default position in the world. And it really is one, right in the heart of the book, chapter 2, to keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles. It's so easy to fight fire with fire. It's so easy to see whether it's, people's political opinions or just some of the nastiness of our world. And because we feel deeply about our things, we sometimes want to fight the world like the world. And yes, we're in the world, but we're not of the world. And to me, 1 Peter was such a good reminder that it's okay to take it on the chin as a Christian, because Jesus did. He left an example that would follow in his steps. And so, the path up is down. And I think 1 Peter is such a good challenge to how all of us feel some days, where we want to fight back. We want to, do those things, but we're called to follow Christ, not the world's example.
So 2021, 1 Peter, marriage, Daniel. 2022, where are we headed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, again, when we're recording this, it's still a little early, so I haven't totally decided. I have a lot. I'll just say this much. I have a lot of epistles that I haven't covered.
Gotcha.
So you'll probably hear an epistle this year.
Okay.
And then I have a lot of Old Testament history that I've got to cover. Kings, Chronicles, Samuel, some of those books.
Because the goal is to preach everything before you call it a day, Lord willing.
I would love to, Lord willing. I mean, if I could preach 66 books, that would be great. Now, I can't do them at the same detail level. I mean, and some books don't require that. I mean, verse by verse through Isaiah would take us 25 years. So you have to handle larger themes. But yeah, so I mean, I'd love to do that, preach the whole counsel of God, as Paul said. But so we'll see what that specifically looks like this next year. But yeah, I see us doing that. Of course, I've preached Matthew and Mark as Gospels.
Yeah, you got two Gospels done.
I plan to come back and do Luke next, but not next year. Most likely it'll be a year out. So this year will be filled with some other books. But I'm still praying about that. The elders and I start talking about that. So yeah, we'll see what the Lord has in store for that.
I want to switch a little bit to maybe a little bit of an overview of last year. 2021 sort of a wacky year. 2020 is crazy. 2021 still little hairy, little weird, still trying to get our feet under us. For you, looking back, what was your favorite takeaway of the year?
Yeah, so my favorite part of 2021 was being able to just get back to basically normal. I felt like we were sitting on the runway in a plane waiting to take off.
Yeah, very much so.
Everything was set, but it's that irritating feeling like, okay, come on, let's go. And so I remember just waiting. I wanted youth to get back and children to get back and Sunday school to get back. And
we were hoping that too.
Oh, yes. Small groups to get going. And, then we started going and we had that little spike of COVID that we thought, oh, no, here it goes again.
Yeah, September, yeah.
Yeah, so all of that just, it just felt, it was a lot of hurry up and wait at times.
Yeah.
So I was so thrilled to see things return to more normal with, koinonias and fellowship dinners and just some of our normal missions offerings and just things that helps us feel like this is what we should be doing as a church. So,
are we in the post-COVID era now? Are we still kind of working our way to where we're kind of off the shackles of it? Because we felt like we were going there, and then September we kind of got derailed. Are we still sort of eking our way out of it? Where does 2022 look like on that?
Well, I certainly don't have a crystal ball any more than anybody else. Proverbs says, man plans his ways, but the Lord determines his steps. And so I write things in pencil and hand God the eraser. And so, I think that's how we should all live our lives. And so the elders have said, hey, we don't want to go back to canceling, suspending, changing. We're going to listen and submit to government as long as it doesn't, conflict with Scripture. And we're going to weigh through, pray through, think through those things if that does become the case. But no, we want to move forward. We want to march forward. We want to gather, meet, celebrate missions. I hope 2022 is a year filled with missions trips and people going and, more people coming than ever before. And I think even if our methods and ministries get derailed, the mission never stops. And so we need to find creative new ways to keep doing that.
A little backstory. I got to the church in 2008, graduated college and left in 2016, yada, 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 2021, come back. For me, those 5 years of not being at Forest Baptist Church, I come back with, not knowing what's happened for 5 years. And you come back on the other side and you feel some things are similar, some things are different. You feel different tones. For you being the senior pastor for so long, what have the last 5 years, what have you noticed? Last 10, last 15? You've been in your position now for a while. I'm curious what that angle looks like from your end.
Yeah. So for those that maybe don't know, I've been at Forest now since 1998. So that's puts us over 20 years.
Does that predate the new building?
It predates, the main sanctuary.
Okay.
Yeah, it predates that.
Okay.
So, when I came, it was just the old, the small building where the education wing is now. But yeah, and then I've been the senior pastor since 2006. So I've been doing that for more than 15, 16 years now. So I now feel like furniture. I feel like I'm just, I don't mean in the bad way. I'm so used to the building, the people, the routines. And the downside of that, sometimes I don't notice things because I'm so used to it. The experience that a visitor has walking in doesn't strike me like it used to because I'm so used to the people and everything. And so sometimes I have to really stop and say new people are coming in. They don't know what this door goes to. They don't know what this sign means, thinking in those terms. So what have I seen change? Wow. Matt, I tell you, I could probably count on my fingers and toes the number of people that are in the church that welcomed me into the church.
Wow.
Maybe even just my fingers. There are so many people I have buried and said goodbye to for, moving and different things that I feel like it's an entirely different church. And it snuck up on me. And so I look out and weeks I go, we have so many visitors with college students and so forth, and it feels like a different church to me. But I'm thrilled by it. I'm thrilled by the youthfulness and the fact that we still have older people and that it's an intergenerational church. I feel like one of our strengths and that people are still coming, and so yeah, I'm thrilled by it. I just have to do a double take sometimes and go, oh, that's right. Like those people aren't here anymore. This thing's not a thing anymore, So I don't have specifics. I love our leadership structure. I'm so thrilled about all of our leadership. I think one of the, people often say the strength of Forest is the Bible, the preaching, and I'm grateful to the Lord for that. But I think our biggest strength is our leaders, from our elders to our staff, to our deacons, to our Sunday school leaders. God has richly blessed us with a deep bench of people that really love Him and love His Word. And the quality of people to me is I'm so humbled by and grateful for the Lord bringing those people around. And I think that's how you really can make disciples and grow as a congregation. So
you hit on some of the strengths. I'm going to ask you about some of the weaknesses.
Yeah.
Where does Forest need to grow?
Yeah, so the Apostle Paul, tells the Ephesians that we are to mature into the fullness of the measure of Christ, which means every congregation is pushing in that direction. Where do we grow more and more like Christ? To put it in sort of practical terms, I think one area we definitely have to put front and center is evangelism and local outreach. If we're not sharing the gospel with our neighbors and family and friends, and the buck stops with me, I need to make a conscious effort from the pulpit every Sunday. Here's what the gospel is. To talk about it, to invite people to trust Christ, and to make that clear and to model for people how to do that. And then to equip people to do that. So I'm hoping in the next year we can, through our classes, ministries, small groups, whatever that looks like, equip people to confidently be able to invite their neighbors and to share Christ with them and do it in different creative ways. And then do some events that would reach out to our community. Forest is a unique place. It's kind of a generally middle upper class kind of community. And so food pantries don't work in Forest typically. That's not going to bring the masses out.
Right.
People will be coming from other places, but like our immediate area, that's not really what it is. So I'm hoping in the next year we can find some creative ways to speak to the families of our church, the marriages of our church, of our community. I would love to see us get a counseling ministry off the ground.
Yes.
Because I think people that are working, husband and wife are working, they got kids, they're trying to pay the mortgage, do all those things. That's going to create, all kinds of issues behind closed doors. So they look good on the outside, but they're a wreck on the inside. I really think there's a lot of fertile soil through something like that. So I'm thankful for the elders and others and staff that have a burden for that. I'd love to see that become a great front door that people can come in and say, hey, I get some free counseling, but then be able to share the gospel with them through that.
You start in 2006. We're now hitting 2022. How have you changed through the years? Super easy question, I know.
Yeah, well, how have I changed? I'll put it this way. I've spent 15 years working really hard, specifically as a pastor. I've spent 15 years learning how to preach. I want to spend the next 15 years learning how to pray. I feel like that's a spiritual discipline that's always been a challenge. I mean, I pray, but I always think, boy, I wish I could pray more, and it's nobody's excuse but my own. I mean, like any Christian. And so the Lord has been slowly molding and shaping me to spend, as I'm spending time in books, writing, thinking, to make sure I'm also bathing my preparation in prayer and to bathe, that. And the Lord has used that greatly in my life. And so I'm hoping to grow in that, to model it, but also just personally do it more and more. And I think I'm also a little bit wiser, maybe, I hope,
Yeah.
I think I'm patient, and I'm not in a hurry. I'm okay. I've seen enough cycles of church life and people come and go and things like that. So yeah, I think that's the case.
Obviously, the staff is meeting, the elders are meeting, you guys are having conversations. I like to talk about trajectory. So for Forest, for the staff, for the elders, what's the trajectory right now for where we want to go?
Yeah, well, I don't know that that's for me to decide. I'm truly congregational and believe that God works through the gathering of his people. But I certainly think as staff and elders, our job is to lead, to model and teach and instruct. Yeah, I certainly think that we've asked the church to put together a building committee to explore those needs. I think we've maxed out our space, and we've got to look at what that looks like for the future. I think, again, making new inroads to our community, I think that's absolutely critical. I'm thrilled with our staff. I can't wait to see what happens in our children's and family ministry now that Tim's here. He's been working for a short time. Our music ministry with Jill as well. Like they're both coming in more, and I see what other staff members have done, and I think, wow, what in 2 or 3, 4 years is going to look like, and what's the potential for that? So I'm thrilled just kind of overall with where the Lord's guiding us and leading us. And yeah, I don't have concrete plans, but I want to be prayerful about it, and I want the DNA of the church and the congregation to be in where we go and what we do. I want to be very careful about having some big Tyler-sized vision that I impose on the church. That's not good leadership to me. I am not here to be served by Forest Baptist Church. I am here to serve Forest Baptist Church. I firmly believe that. And so I'm not here to build my kingdom or my followers or anything like that. I want to do what's in the church's best interest, in the community's best interest. Again, as constrained by Scripture and the Lordship of Christ. This is not just I'm not a politician that way, but I'm really here to serve the church. I want the church to help set the agenda and to help us see where the Lord's leading.
The SBC. A lot has come out the last couple of years, a lot of busyness. I just want you to be able to talk a little bit about that. I know you're involved there. Just go through that a little bit about what's happening and what you'd like to share on that.
Yeah, the SBC, I'm a Southern Baptist. The old phrase, I was Southern Baptist born and bred, and I'll be Southern Baptist dead. Or somebody that's got a little, I really, really think that God has blessed our cooperative effort as Southern Baptist to have the largest missionary sending agency in church history. Like, that's literally what it is. And
That's
so
amazing.
to be part of that is an honor. I really think so. Yeah, it comes with warts and wrinkles, but just to be part of that. When you look at the book of Acts and what they did so much with so little, and we sometimes do so little with so much, but I do think we've accomplished so much. The sun never sets on what Southern Baptists do around the world. There's always a missionary somewhere. To me, that's just such a great thing to be part of. That being said, God doesn't need the Southern Baptist Convention, and I'm convinced of that. If it collapsed tomorrow, the kingdom would march on. And I would be leading the church to follow in the kingdom, whatever that looks like. So, but at the same time, I've not given up hope on the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay. Maybe I'm an eternal optimist. I'm like my dad that way. I really want and hope to see the best. But we've had some tough days behind us, and we've got some tough days ahead. There are some questions that have to be answered with the sex abuse issues, with the leadership. I'm hoping that June, the convention for the summer of 2022, we get to see some transparency and we get some answers. I know some pastors have led their church to leave or escrow or kind of. I'm not that impatient. I want to see Southern Baptists have a history. Ed Stetzer has said we have a history of doing what's right after doing what's wrong. I mean, our history is we did a lot of wrong things, and then by God's grace, we came back and corrected it. It seems to me like we've done some wrong things in the sex abuse issues. Now it's time for us to do the right thing, and I'm hopeful that we will. I'm optimistic, but if the Lord takes His hand off and the SBC becomes Ichabod, then I'll walk away from it and lead our church to just keep doing kingdom work. But I don't see that yet, and I want to continue to try to support it because I think our seminaries are solid. I would send any of our young men, young ladies to be part of the seminaries. I want to keep that up. And then the IMB, I mean, I just love the passion that they have to send. And our missionaries, I want to keep supporting them, the sergeants and others that are on, overseas. I want to make sure that we are supporting and undergirding them as they go and do. And the SBC serves us well. So we'll see. My heart's heavy for the SBC. I think about it and gripe about it and then hopefully pray about it because it's easy to just moan. But I don't think the Lord's done yet. And it may be a reckoning. There may be some tough days ahead, but that's okay because I think that's how the Lord often works.
I want to hit on something you just said, too, about I feel like Force has sort of become sort of a hotspot for young ministry people. And I remember when prayer groups started back up, you talked about how, some churches might see that as, oh man, what do we do with all these ministry kids? But Forest kind of embraced that. And I love that you allowed them to run Wednesday night prayer group, correct? Where they're all going through Philippians. Right. And I believe they call themselves the Motley Crew, I believe is the name they've given themselves. That was
the name given to them.
Oh, it was given to them. So I want to talk a little bit about them. How is that going? Speak for your...
Well, so, I mean, really what this is the overflow of a couple things. Number one, when I felt called to ministry at age 16, which is really young, but my dad was the associate pastor at this church. The pastor of the church, when I told him, he took an immediate interest in me. And kind of like Paul to Timothy, started meeting with me, and some men met with me and gave me books to read and had me preach. And boy, that helped me so much to feel like, okay, the church is affirming this and calling. And I think it's a stewardship to the next generation. Scripture says, entrust these things to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So Paul was always looking 3 generations away.
Yeah.
And shame on a church that's not. And so if God has brought these young men to our church, and then I want to be part of that. So it came out of years ago. I had an intern. This is like 6-7 years ago, and I just said, "Hey, why don't you come over for Taco Tuesdays?" And so he came over to eat, and we, started having. And other people found out, and guys were like, "Hey, can I come?" And so it kind of snowballed into this unofficial group. It was Taco Tuesdays, then it became Mexican Mondays.
That's right.
And so it's a group that it's specific for members of Forest. So you got to be a member of the church. Okay. It's not open-ended. You have to feel called to vocational ministry of some kind. And you're not, may not know what that looks like, but if anybody's thinking about it, then seminary student, undergrad student. And we give you free tacos. I give them free books, and I let them ask whatever questions they want. It's kind of unfiltered, uncensored. This is what a pastor's life is like. And so it's a chance to, here's what seminary doesn't teach you. And so through that, we've had the chance. We've seen, pastors and associate pastors and youth pastors come out of our church that have come through our house and our table, but really through our church. And so I want to continue to give avenues for these young men to be able to preach and teach. and explore their giftedness. Paul talks about the giftings that Timothy had that was evident to everyone. Well, then people have got to see it and hear it. I had a former pastor that took that interest in me, and I want to be the guy that takes that interest in the next generation, because some of these young men could pastor my grandchildren. And I really want to make sure that they're doing it faithfully and doing it well. And as a church, if a church is not looking 2 or 3 generations out, like I said, I think they're going in the wrong direction.
So for someone younger who's trying to figure out calling in general, how do you think God's calling works? Like, how would you try to describe, like, trying to understand the calling? Is it something that you try to develop? Is it something you look for? How do you explain that?
Yeah, so I think sometimes we mystify the idea of calling maybe a little bit too much, because in some circles, it's like the trump card.
Yeah.
So if you say, God called me to do X, even if it's unbiblical, they'll continue. I mean, again, as a church, we believe in complementarianism in the home and in the church, and so male leadership is elders and pastors. And if a woman says, "Well, God's called me to be a pastor," well, and that sometimes is used as a trump card. Well, I don't care what you think. This is what, and so we would say, no, like the Bible actually gives us some criteria, and then we work through that. So I think sometimes, again, the calling, particularly to ministry, is both internal and external. And so there's Paul says, if any man desires the office of bishop or elder, overseer, it's a good thing he desires. Well, he used the word desire twice. That's the key word there. It's a desire. It starts from something within.
Okay.
And so I think we have desires, and then through the church is the ones that are like the checks and balances to that says, okay, you might feel like you have the desire, but you're not qualified. Or
gotcha.
you're not competent even. So let's grow in this area. While that's kind of specific to pastoral work, I think in general, when it comes to God's will, whether you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, I don't think that God's will is like a maze where a mouse goes down it and you make a wrong turn. Oh, have you messed up your whole life? Right? And some people do, and I can understand, but I think God's will, it's more in terms of, the psalmist says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. So I think God's will in the simplest form fashion is obey the Bible and do whatever you want.
I like that.
I mean, it's
like
really
that, yeah.
simple. But if you're out of God's will, what's known, then why do you think he would tell you what's unknown?
Yeah.
Right? But if you're doing what's known and you're walking with the Lord, then I think your heart's desires become his desires.
Yeah.
Right? His desires mold and shape yours. And so therefore, whatever you do is going to be, guiding according to his will. So I think in that sense, it's we overcomplicate it sometimes.
I'm going to get you out of this on a fun one, and I love asking this question at the very end. If you could see one biblical event live without the consequences, you're not suffering in whatever it is that's going on,
right.
What would you want to see with your own eyes? Like you see the story, maybe you can visualize it. What would you like to just be plopped straight in the middle of?
Well,
and see unfold?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many, obviously, have been in Daniel. You got the lion's den and fire furnace, all that. But in all honesty, I'm not sure in terms of something that a human could observe, right? Like creation, right. But if there is something that I could have observed, probably the resurrection of Lazarus.
Okay, why?
When else are you going to stand in a cemetery and a guy climbs out of the grave? I mean, it would have been so astonishing. And I think it's such a climactic moment in John's gospel. And it's meant to be this head scratching, like, he's been dead for 4 days? What? And then he says, Lazarus, come forth. And he walks out like a mummy. And that, to me, that would have been astounding, And it wouldn't have been astounding because Lazarus was amazing. It would have been, who is this guy? Apart from seeing the resurrection of Christ, because the difference being, of course, Lazarus died again. Yeah. Poor guy, he had to go back through it. But if there was an event that I could be there and see as others would have seen, that would have just been, because I've stood in lots of cemeteries and buried people. And so far, none of them have walked out.
Yeah, that's true.
And so to see that reversal, that glimpse of the kingdom that one day we'll all come out of the grave, one day we'll all be raised, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting destruction. Just that glimpse of that moment to me would have been just incredible. So,
well, Pastor, I thank you for being here, and we'll be praying for you. Thank you so much for being on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Matt, appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pastor Tyler, for taking the time to speak with us today. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the Forest Baptist Church podcast on your favorite podcasting app, where next week you're going to hear from our Minister of Students, Reed Hernandez. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.